What would you do if you discovered that your own military base was harboring a traitor? That someone in high command was selling secrets to foreign agents while you mopped floors and emptied trash cans? Colonel Stella Wagner thought her career was over when she was stripped of her rank and demoted to the most humiliating position imaginable. But sometimes, being invisible is exactly what you need to see what others don't want you to see. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of the Pentagon's basement level hummed with an electrical buzz that seemed to match the pounding in Stella Mitchell's head. 3 days ago, she had been Colonel Stella Wagner, decorated intelligence officer with 15 years of exemplary service and a corner office on the 3rd floor. Today, she was pushing a janitor's cart through the same corridors where she once commanded respect, wearing a gray uniform that felt like a prison sentence. The demotion had been swift and brutal. One moment she was briefing Joint Chiefs on classified operations in Eastern Europe. The next she was being escorted out of her office by military police while her colleagues watched in stunned silence. The official reason was mishandling of classified information, a charge so vague it could mean anything or nothing. The unofficial whispers were worse. Questions about her loyalty, suggestions that she'd been compromised, rumors that painted her as everything she'd spent her career fighting against. General Robert Hayes, her former supervisor and the man she'd once considered a mentor, had delivered the news himself. His weathered face showed no emotion as he read from the official document, but Sarah caught something in his eyes, not satisfaction, but something that looked almost like fear. "This is effective immediately, Mitchell," he'd said, refusing to meet her gaze. "You'll be reassigned to maintenance duties while the investigation continues. Consider yourself lucky you're not facing court-martial." Lucky. The word burned in her memory as she wheeled her cart past the conference room where she'd once presented intelligence briefings to senators and cabinet members. Through the glass, she could see her replacement, Major Jennifer Walsh, a younger officer with ambition that outweighed her experience. Walsh was gesturing animatedly at a wall map, clearly enjoying her sudden elevation to Sarah's former position. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. For years, she'd specialized in deep cover operations, blending into hostile environments where a single mistake could mean death. She'd posed as everything from a businessman in Moscow to an aid worker in Afghanistan, always invisible, always watching. Now she was invisible again, but this time in her own building, among people who'd once hung on her every word. The morning routine was deliberately humiliating. Report to Frank Rodriguez, the head of maintenance, a decent man who looked genuinely uncomfortable giving orders to someone who'd outranked him just days before. Collect cleaning supplies from a closet that smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Begin the systematic cleaning of offices that once fell under her security clearance, now accessible only because someone needed to empty the trash. Her first assignment was the intelligence wing, a cruel joke that someone in administration had clearly enjoyed. Sarah pushed her cart through hallways lined with offices belonging to analysts and case officers who'd once sought her approval for their operations. Some looked away when they saw her, embarrassed by her fall or afraid that whatever had brought her down might be contagious. Others stared openly, their expressions ranging from pity to satisfaction, depending on old grudges and office politics she'd never bothered to navigate. Captain David Chun, a junior analyst she'd mentored, actually approached her near the water cooler. His young face was tight with confusion and concern. Sarah, he stammered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "What really happened? Nobody believes you mishandled classified intel. You're the most careful person I know." Sarah continued wiping down surfaces, her movements methodical and professional, even in this degraded role. "Sometimes appearances can be deceiving, Chun," she said quietly. Sometimes the only way to see the truth is from the bottom looking up. Chun looked puzzled by her response, but before he could ask what she meant, Major Walsh appeared in the hallway. Her crisp uniform and confident stride marked her as someone still ascending the ladder Sarah had been pushed from. "Captain Chun," Walsh called out, her voice carrying clear authority. "Shouldn't you be preparing the briefing materials for this afternoon's session?" "Yes, ma'am," Chun replied, but he hesitated, looking back at Sarah with troubled eyes. "I just wanted to. I'm sure our maintenance staff appreciates your concern." Walsh interrupted, her tone making it clear that maintenance staff was the lowest category of human she could imagine. "But we have real work to do," Sarah felt. The familiar burn of anger in her chest, but she'd survived too many hostile environments to let emotion show on her face. Instead, she watched Walsh carefully, noting the way the Major positioned herself, the subtle body language that suggested someone trying very hard to project authority they weren't entirely sure they possessed. Interesting. As Chun hurried away, Walsh turned her attention to Sarah with the kind of look a person might give a stray dog that had wandered into a fancy restaurant. "I trust you understand the importance of discretion in your new role," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for nearby personnel to hear. "Maintenance staff should be seen and not heard. We can't have any complications from people who might have conflicting loyalties." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah met Walsh's gaze steadily, letting the silence stretch until the younger officer looked away first. "I understand my job perfectly, Major," Sarah said finally. "I clean up messes. Some of them are bigger than others." Walsh's face flushed slightly, but before she could respond, General Hayes appeared at the end of the hallway. His presence had an immediate effect on the surrounding personnel. Conversations stopped, postures straightened, and Walsh snapped to attention so quickly she nearly gave herself whiplash. Hayes approached with the measured stride of someone who'd commanded troops in 3 different wars, his silver hair perfectly styled and his uniform immaculate. "Major Walsh," he said, his voice carrying the authority that came from decades of command. "I trust the transition is going smoothly?" "Yes, sir," Walsh replied, her earlier confidence now replaced by the nervous energy of someone trying to impress a superior. "Colonel Mitchell's former responsibilities are being handled appropriately." Hayes glanced at Sarah, who was continuing her cleaning routine as if the conversation weren't happening. For just a moment, their eyes met, and Sarah saw something flicker across his expression, not guilt exactly, but something close to it. Then the mask was back in place, the professional distance that came with rank and responsibility. "Good," Hayes said simply. "We can't afford any disruptions in our intelligence operations. The current situation in the Pacific requires our full attention." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I trust all personnel understand the importance of maintaining security protocols." It was a warning, delivered with the subtlety of a career military officer who'd learned to communicate in layers. Sarah heard the message clearly. Stay quiet. Stay invisible, and maybe this situation won't get worse for you. But she also heard something else, a tension in his voice that suggested Hayes wasn't as confident as he wanted to appear. As the general and major walked away, Sarah found herself alone in the hallway with her cart and her thoughts. 3 days ago, she'd been investigating irregularities in intelligence reports from Pacific operations. Small discrepancies that might have been simple errors or might have been something more serious. She'd been preparing to brief Hayes on her concerns when the hammer had fallen on her career. The timing was suspicious, but then again, everything looked suspicious when you were viewing it through the lens of professional paranoia. Sarah had spent enough time in hostile territory to know that coincidences were usually anything but coincidental. Someone had wanted her removed from her position, and they'd done it with surgical precision. The question was why. Sarah pushed her cart toward the next office, her mind already working through possibilities. In deep cover operations, the key was always patience, watching, learning, waiting for the right moment to act. She'd been trained by the best, had survived situations that would have broken lesser operators. Being demoted to janitor was humiliating, but it wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a different kind of mission. As she began cleaning the next office, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. A memo on the desk, partially hidden under other papers, contained references to the same Pacific operation she'd been investigating. The classification level was higher than anything a major should have access to, and there were handwritten notes in the margins that looked like coordinates. Sarah glanced around to make sure she was alone, then used her phone to quickly photograph the document. The cleaning lady routine provided perfect cover. Who paid attention to the help? Who suspected that someone emptying trash cans might be conducting counterintelligence? For the first time since her demotion, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They'd tried to neutralize her by making her invisible. Instead, they'd given her the perfect position to see everything they didn't want anyone to notice. The hunt was on. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The second week of Stella's new reality brought a cruel refinement to her punishment. It became clear that her demotion wasn't just about removing her from sensitive operations. It was about breaking her spirit entirely. Someone had orchestrated a campaign designed to strip away every last shred of dignity she'd earned over 15 years of distinguished service. It started with the assignment changes. Frank Rodriguez approached her Monday morning with obvious reluctance, his weathered face creased with discomfort. "Stella, I got new orders from upstairs," he said, unable to meet her eyes. "They want you handling the executive floor now. All the senior staff offices, the executive floor, where General Hayes maintained his office, where the Joint Chiefs held their morning briefings, where every person who walked those halls would recognize Colonel Sarah Mitchell, former rising star, now reduced to scrubbing their toilets and emptying their trash." It was psychological warfare, pure and simple. Sarah's first morning on the executive floor felt like running a gauntlet. She pushed her cart through corridors where she'd once walked with purpose and authority, past offices of men and women who'd once sought her counsel on matters of national security. Now they watched her with a mixture of embarrassment and relief. Embarrassment for her fall, relief that it wasn't them pushing the cart. Admiral Thomas Bradley, a man she'd briefed on submarine operations in the South China Sea just 2 weeks prior, actually crossed to the other side of the hallway to avoid her. The gesture was so deliberate, so pointed, that several junior officers noticed and began whispering among themselves. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but she filed the information away. Bradley's reaction seemed excessive, even for someone trying to avoid association with a disgraced colleague. The real architect of her humiliation revealed herself during the Tuesday morning briefing preparation. Sarah was cleaning conference room windows when Major Walsh entered with her new staff, their voices carrying clearly in the enclosed space. "I want to make something absolutely clear," Walsh was saying to the assembled analysts and case officers. "The previous leadership of this department allowed certain irregularities to develop. Standards became lax. Security protocols were compromised." She paused dramatically, her eyes finding Sarah through the glass. "We cannot afford to repeat those mistakes." Captain Lisa Morrison, one of Sarah's former analysts, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Ma'am, with respect, Colonel Mitchell's record speaks for itself. Her operations in Eastern Europe were textbook examples of—" Captain Morrison, Walsh interrupted sharply. "Are you questioning my assessment of this department's recent performance?" "No, ma'am," Morrison replied, but her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm simply stating that Colonel Mitchell's methods were proven effective in the field." Walsh's smile was cold and calculating. effective methods that somehow resulted in compromised intelligence and questions about loyalty. I think we have very different definitions of effective, Captain. Sarah continued cleaning, but her mind was racing. Walsh was systematically undermining her reputation, poisoning the well of professional relationships she'd spent years building. But why? Walsh had been a competent but unremarkable officer before Sarah's fall. What had changed to give her both the motivation and the authority to orchestrate this campaign? The answer came partially during her lunch break. Sarah was eating a sandwich in the maintenance staff room when she overheard a conversation between two communications technicians. "Did you hear about the new security protocols?" Sergeant Kevin Park was saying to his colleague, technical specialist Maria Santos. "Everything's getting locked down tight. New encryption keys, restricted access lists, the whole 9 yards." "About time," Santos replied. "Word is there's been a leak somewhere. Someone's been feeding intel to foreign operatives." Sarah's sandwich suddenly tasted like cardboard. A leak. That explained the paranoia, the sudden emphasis on security, the need to find a scapegoat. But it didn't explain why she'd been chosen for the role. "You think it was really Mitchell?" Park asked, lowering his voice. "I mean, she always seemed solid. Straight arrow, you know." Santos shrugged. "Who knows? Sometimes the ones you trust most are the ones who fool you. But I heard there's more to it. Something about Pacific operations, classified stuff above our pay grade." Pacific operations. The same area Sarah had been investigating when her world collapsed. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was still incomplete. Someone was running intelligence to foreign contacts, and they'd needed Sarah out of the way to continue operating. But who? And how deep did the conspiracy go? Her answer came sooner than expected. Wednesday afternoon, Sarah was cleaning General Hayes's outer office when his secretary, Mrs. Dorothy Patterson, stepped away from her desk for an extended coffee break. The general's door was slightly ajar, and voices drifted out from what sounded like a heated conversation. "The timeline is accelerating," Hayes was saying, his voice tight with stress. "Our contact in Beijing is getting impatient. They want the submarine patrol schedules before the joint exercises begin." Sarah's blood ran cold. Submarine patrol schedules, Beijing contact. The general she'd served loyally for 8 years was selling military secrets to Chinese intelligence. "Relax, Robert," came a voice Sarah didn't immediately recognize. "Mitchell's been neutralized." She was getting too close to the truth, but now she's pushing a mop around in the basement. "Problem solved. For now," Hayes replied. "But what if she starts putting pieces together? She's not stupid, you know. 15 years in intelligence doesn't just disappear because you change her job title." "Then we'll have to find a more permanent solution," the unknown voice said. There was something chilling in the casual way the threat was delivered. An accident, perhaps. Or maybe she finally cracks under the pressure and does something regrettable. Suicides aren't uncommon among disgraced officers. Sarah's hands went cold. They weren't just talking about career destruction anymore. They were talking about murder. "I don't like where this is heading," Hayes said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mitchell served this country with distinction. She deserves better than this. She deserves whatever keeps our operation secure," the other voice snapped. "You knew what you were signing up for when you started taking our money, General. Don't develop a conscience now." Sarah heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly busied herself with cleaning the secretary's desk. The door opened fully, and a man emerged whom Sarah recognized with shock. Colonel Marcus Webb, Deputy Director of Pacific Operations. He was Hayes's superior, the man responsible for coordinating all military intelligence in the region. If Webb was involved, the conspiracy reached much higher than she'd imagined. Webb paused when he saw Sarah, his pale blue eyes studying her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "General," he called back into the office, "perhaps we should discuss security protocols for maintenance personnel. Some areas might be too sensitive for current staffing arrangements." Hayes appeared in the doorway, his face carefully neutral. "Of course, Marcus. I'll have Walsh review the access lists immediately." Webb nodded, still watching Sarah. "Excellent. We can't be too careful these days. Threats come from unexpected directions." He walked past her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne and see the calculation in his eyes. After both men left, Sarah remained in the outer office, her mind reeling. The conspiracy wasn't just about selling secrets, it was a systematic betrayal reaching into the highest levels of military command. Webb controlled Pacific operations, which meant he had access to everything: troop movements, submarine patrols, allied communications, strategic planning. The damage he could inflict was incalculable. But Sarah also realized something else. They'd made a crucial mistake. By demoting her instead of eliminating her immediately, they'd given her the perfect cover for investigation. As a janitor, she was invisible, ignored, dismissed as irrelevant. She could move through their spaces, hear their conversations, observe their behaviors without raising suspicion. The irony was perfect. In trying to neutralize her, they'd created their own worst nightmare: a trained intelligence operative with nothing left to lose and unlimited access to their activities. Thursday brought new revelations and new dangers. Sarah was cleaning Webb's office when she discovered a hidden safe behind a filing cabinet. The combination lock was sophisticated, but not beyond her capabilities. During her years in deep cover, she'd learned skills that weren't taught in standard military training. Inside the safe, she found documentation that made her stomach turn. Bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, communication logs with contacts in Beijing and Moscow, detailed intelligence reports that should never have left, secure facilities, and most damning of all, a list of upcoming operations that were being compromised before they even began. Sarah photographed everything, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. This was enough evidence to bring down not just Webb and Hayes, but an entire network of traitors who'd been operating under the cover of legitimate military service. But as she was replacing the documents, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with purpose toward Webb's office. Sarah quickly closed the safe and spun the dial, then grabbed her cleaning supplies and moved toward the door. Too late. Webb entered with Major Walsh and two security personnel Sarah didn't recognize. Their faces told her everything she needed to know. They suspected something. Well, Webb said, his voice carrying false warmth. "Working late, I see. Dedication to duty, even in your reduced circumstances." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "Just finishing up, sir. The office is ready for tomorrow." Webb moved closer, invading her personal space with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the power. "Tell me, Mitchell, are you finding your new position educational?" The question was loaded with meaning. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Very educational, sir. You learn a lot about people when you're invisible to them." Something flickered in Webb's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition that his prey wasn't as helpless as she appeared. But before he could respond, his phone rang with an urgent tone that suggested encrypted communications. "Sir," Walsh interjected, "the Beijing contact is on the secure line." Webb's attention shifted immediately, the hunter distracted by more pressing concerns. "We'll continue this conversation later, Mitchell. Be very careful about your educational pursuits." As Sarah left the office, she heard Webb answering his secure phone. The conversation was brief and conducted in code, but she caught enough to understand that another operation was being compromised. American lives were at stake, and these traitors were selling them out for money. The systematic humiliation they'd subjected her to was nothing compared to the betrayal they were committing against their own country. But they'd made one fatal error in their campaign to break her. They'd forgotten that the most dangerous enemy is one who has nothing left to lose. Sarah Mitchell had lost her rank, her office, her professional respect. But she'd gained something more valuable: the truth about who her real enemies were, and the perfect position to bring them down. The hunt was about to become a war. The third week of Stella's covert investigation brought revelations that shattered everything she thought she knew about the scope of the conspiracy. What had begun as suspicions about a single traitor had evolved into something far more sinister, a network of corruption that reached into multiple branches of the military and threatened ongoing operations across the Pacific Theater. Stella's breakthrough came during an unexpected source: the Pentagon's secure waste disposal system. As part of her janitorial duties, she was responsible for collecting classified documents marked for destruction and transporting them to the secure shredding facility in the basement. It was mindless work that most people assumed required no intelligence or attention to detail. They were wrong. On Friday morning, while sorting documents for destruction, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Mixed in with routine administrative papers was a partial intelligence report bearing yesterday's date, a real-time assessment of American submarine positions in the South China Sea. The document was classified at the highest levels, accessible only to a handful of personnel with special compartmented information clearance. But this wasn't just any intelligence report. Sarah recognized the format and classification markings immediately. This was a verbatim copy of intelligence that should never have existed outside the most secure facilities. Someone had photographed or copied the original and was preparing to dispose of the evidence after transmission to foreign contacts. The implications were staggering. Whoever was running this operation had access to intelligence so sensitive that its compromise could shift the balance of power in the entire Pacific region. American submarines were operating under the assumption of stealth and surprise. If their positions were known to hostile forces, entire crews could be walking into death traps. Sarah photographed the partial document with her phone, then carefully noted which office it had come from based on the collection route. The trail led to Admiral Bradley's suite, the same man who'd crossed the hallway to avoid her just days earlier. His excessive reaction suddenly made perfect sense. He wasn't embarrassed by her fall from grace. He was terrified that she might discover his treachery. But Sarah's investigation took a dangerous turn when she realized she wasn't the only one conducting surveillance. During her Monday morning routine in the communications center, she noticed technical specialist Maria Santos watching her with unusual intensity. Santos had been present during the conversation about security leaks, but now her attention seemed focused and predatory rather than casual. The pattern became clear over the next few days. Wherever Sarah went, Santos or one of her colleagues seemed to appear nearby. They were conducting counter-surveillance, watching the watcher, trying to determine if the disgraced colonel had discovered anything that might threaten their operation. Sarah adapted her methods accordingly. Years of operating in hostile territory had taught her how to work under surveillance, how to appear innocent while gathering intelligence. She developed a routine that seemed random but actually allowed her to systematically investigate key personnel and facilities without establishing any obvious pattern. Her persistence paid off Wednesday afternoon when she discovered the communication hub of the entire operation. While cleaning the secure server room in the basement, Sarah noticed that one of the terminals was running active encryption software despite being in a restricted access area that should have been dormant during normal business hours. The terminal was connected to an external satellite link that bypassed the Pentagon's normal security protocols entirely. This was it, the pipeline through which classified intelligence was being transmitted to foreign contacts. But accessing the terminal required biometric verification and security codes that Sarah didn't possess. She needed another approach. The answer came from an unexpected source: Captain David Chun, the young analyst she'd mentored before her demotion. Chun had been one of the few people to show genuine concern for her situation, and Sarah had noticed that he'd been conducting his own informal investigation into the irregularities that had led to her downfall. Their conversation took place in the Pentagon's public cafeteria, where surveillance would be difficult and their interaction could appear coincidental. Chun approached her table during lunch break, his young face tight with concern and determination. "Sarah," he said quietly, sliding into the seat across from her, "I need to tell you something. The intelligence reports that led to your demotion, they were fabricated." Sarah's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "Explain." "I've been reviewing the source documents, the ones that supposedly showed irregularities in your handling of classified material. The timestamps don't match. The access logs show impossible sequences. Someone created fake evidence to justify your removal." This confirmation of what Sarah had suspected was both validating and terrifying. Who had access to create those documents? Chun's voice dropped even lower. "That's the problem. The forgeries were sophisticated, created by someone with administrative access to multiple systems. Someone high enough in the command structure to manipulate records across different departments." "Webb," Sarah said, the name escaping before she could stop herself. Chun's eyes widened. "Colonel Webb? You think he's involved?" Sarah realized she'd revealed too much, but Chun's information had confirmed that the conspiracy reached exactly where she'd suspected. "David, you need to be very careful about this investigation. These people have already destroyed my career. They won't hesitate to do worse to you." "But we can't just let them get away with it," Chun protested. "If they're selling intelligence to foreign agents, American lives are at stake." "Which is exactly why we need to be smart about this," Sarah replied. "Going through official channels won't work. They have people positioned to intercept any reports or evidence. We need irrefutable proof and a way to deliver it to people we can trust." Chun leaned forward, his expression intense. "What do you need from me?" Sarah considered carefully. Chun's position as an analyst gave him access to systems and information that her janitorial role couldn't provide. But involving him also increased the risk exponentially. If Webb's people suspected Chun was helping her, they would eliminate him without hesitation. "I need you to monitor communication patterns," she said finally. "Look for anomalies in intelligence distribution, reports that are accessed by people who shouldn't have clearance, or intelligence that appears in multiple formats suggesting duplication for unauthorized transmission." "I can do that," Chun said. "But Sarah, what's your real plan here? You can't expose this conspiracy by yourself." Before Sarah could answer, Major Walsh appeared at their table with the predatory smile that had become her trademark. "Captain Chun," she said, her voice carrying false friendliness, "I've been looking for you. We have urgent matters to discuss in the intelligence briefing room." Chun started to rise, but Walsh wasn't finished. "And Sarah," she continued, using the familiar name with deliberate condescension, "I hope you're not discussing matters above your current security clearance. Maintenance personnel shouldn't concern themselves with operational details." The warning was crystal clear, but Sarah met Walsh's gaze steadily. "Just discussing the weather, Major. Chun was telling me about the storm systems moving in from the Pacific." Walsh's smile turned sharp. "Yes, weather can be quite unpredictable. Storms have a way of destroying things that aren't properly secured." She turned to Chun. "Captain, shall we?" As they walked away, Sarah caught Chun's expression of worry and determination. The young officer was committed to helping her, but she feared that his involvement would ultimately get him killed. Webb's operation had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy careers and threaten lives. Adding Chun to their target list would only increase the body count. But Sarah's worst fears were confirmed Thursday evening when she discovered just how extensively she was being monitored. While cleaning Webb's office after hours, she found A surveillance report with her photograph clipped to the front page. The document detailed her movements, her interactions, and most disturbingly, her association with Chun. The report concluded with a recommendation that made her heart race. Subject Mitchell represents increasing security risk. Recommend immediate escalation to permanent solution. Contact shows concerning curiosity about operational matters. Both subjects require neutralization before compromise occurs. They were planning to kill her in Chun. The timeline was accelerating. And Sarah realized that her careful investigation had triggered their survival instincts. She photographed the report, but as she was replacing it in Webb's files, she heard voices in the corridor outside. "The Beijing contact is getting nervous," Admiral Bradley was saying as he and Webb approached the office. "They want confirmation that our security concerns have been addressed permanently." "They'll have their confirmation by the weekend," Webb replied. "Mitchell's been asking too many questions, and now she's involving other personnel. It's time to clean house." Sarah had seconds to react. She quickly closed the filing cabinet and moved to the far side of the office, positioning herself near the window where she could appear to be cleaning. When the two men entered, she was wiping down the glass with mechanical precision. Webb stopped, short when he saw her, his pale eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You're working late again, Mitchell. This is becoming a concerning pattern." "Overtime pay, sir," Sarah replied without looking up from her work. "Trying to make ends meet on a janitor's salary." Bradley moved closer, his admiral's insignia catching the light. "Perhaps we should discuss adjusting your work schedule. Some areas might be more suitable for daytime cleaning." "That won't be necessary," Webb said, his voice carrying a note of finality that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I suspect Miss Mitchell's current schedule won't be an issue much longer." The threat was unmistakable. Sarah finished cleaning the window and gathered her supplies, moving toward the door with the measured pace of someone trying not to appear hurried. But as she reached the threshold, Webb spoke again. "Mitchell," he called, "have a safe weekend. Be very careful about your recreational activities." Sarah nodded once and left the office, but she could feel their eyes on her back like targeting lasers. They knew, maybe not the full extent of what she'd discovered, but they knew enough to have marked her for elimination. As she walked through the empty corridors toward the maintenance room, Sarah's mind raced through her options. She had evidence of the conspiracy, but not enough to convince skeptical authorities who might include other compromised personnel. She had Chun's support, but involving him further would likely get him killed alongside her. Most importantly, she had perhaps 48 hours before Webb's permanent solution was implemented. The weekend that Webb had referenced wasn't a suggestion, it was a deadline. Sarah Mitchell had spent 3 weeks uncovering a conspiracy that threatened national security. Now she had to survive long enough to expose it, and that meant transforming from investigator to operator. The intelligence officer who'd been systematically humiliated and threatened was about to remind these traitors exactly what 15 years of specialized training could accomplish. When survival was on the line, the dangerous discoveries phase of her mission was over. The counterattack was about to begin. Friday morning brought a revelation that transformed Stella's understanding of the conspiracy from a localized betrayal to a systematic compromise of American military intelligence. The scope of the treachery was so vast that it threatened not just individual operations, but the entire strategic balance in the Pacific theater. The breakthrough came through an unexpected vector, the Pentagon's internal courier system. As part of her expanded duties, Stella had been assigned to assist with document transport between high-security facilities within the building. It was grunt work that required security clearance verification but little oversight. Perfect cover for someone conducting covert intelligence gathering. While delivering classified briefing materials to the Joint Chiefs Conference Room, Sarah noticed something that stopped her cold. Scattered across the conference table were operational maps showing American fleet positions, submarine patrol routes, and classified satellite imagery of Chinese military installations. But these weren't the sanitized briefing materials typically used in high-level meetings. These were raw intelligence reports containing details so sensitive that their compromise could trigger international incidents. More disturbing was what she observed when she entered the adjacent preparation room to deliver additional documents. Colonel Janet Pierce, the Deputy Director of Strategic Intelligence, was photographing the maps with a high-resolution camera disguised as a standard smartphone. Pierce's actions were swift and professional, suggesting this wasn't her first time copying classified materials for unauthorized transmission. Sarah quickly retreated before Pierce noticed her presence, but the implications were staggering. Pierce controlled strategic intelligence assessment for the entire Pacific region. If she was compromised, it meant that every major military operation in the area was being fed directly to hostile foreign intelligence services. The conspiracy wasn't just about individual traitors selling secrets for personal gain. This was a coordinated intelligence operation that had systematically infiltrated multiple levels of American military command. The Chinese weren't just buying information. They were running assets who controlled the flow of that information. At its source, Sarah's next discovery came during her lunch break, when she noticed an unusual gathering in the Pentagon's secure parking garage. From her position near the maintenance entrance, she observed Colonel Webb meeting with 3 individuals she didn't recognize. The meeting was brief but intense, with Webb handing over what appeared to be encrypted storage devices in exchange for a briefcase. But what made Sarah's blood run cold was the 4th person present at the meeting, Major General Patricia Collins, the Pentagon's Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations. Collins was responsible for coordinating intelligence, sharing with allied nations, and maintaining security protocols for the most sensitive operations. Her presence at this clandestine meeting meant that the conspiracy reached into the highest levels of American intelligence hierarchy. Using her phone's telephoto lens, Sarah managed to capture several photographs of the meeting participants. Later analysis of the images revealed license plates from diplomatic vehicles, suggesting that at least some of Webb's contacts were operating under official foreign diplomatic cover. The Chinese weren't just running a spy ring, they were conducting a diplomatic intelligence operation that provided legal protection for their agents. The afternoon brought even more disturbing revelations when Sarah discovered the true purpose of the communication hub she'd found in the basement server room. While conducting routine cleaning in the adjacent storage area, she overheard a conversation between technical specialist Santos and a man she recognized from the parking garage meeting. The submarine tracking data is being transmitted in real time, Santos was explaining to her contact. Every American vessel in the South China Sea is broadcasting its position directly to our Beijing station. Their naval operations are completely transparent to us now. Real-time submarine tracking. Sarah's mind reeled at the implications. American submarines operated under the assumption of stealth and concealment. If their positions were being broadcast to Chinese intelligence, every submarine crew in the Pacific was sailing into potential death traps. The strategic advantage that underwater warfare provided was being systematically eliminated by this network of traitors. But Santos wasn't finished. General Collins has also provided the encryption keys for NATO communications in the region. We're not just monitoring American operations, we're listening to everything their allies are planning as well. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. This wasn't just an American intelligence disaster, it was a comprehensive compromise of Allied military operations throughout the Pacific. Months or even years of careful strategic planning were being undermined by a network of traitors who'd positioned themselves at the critical nerve centers of military intelligence. Sarah's investigation took a personal turn when she discovered that her own demotion had been part of a larger pattern of eliminating potential threats to the conspiracy. While reviewing personnel files she was supposed to be organizing for destruction, she found documentation of at least 6 other intelligence officers who'd been transferred, demoted, or forced into early retirement over the past 18 months. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Each officer had been investigating irregularities in Pacific operations. Each had gotten close to discovering evidence of unauthorized intelligence sharing. And each had been systematically removed from positions where they could threaten the conspiracy security. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Stevens had been investigating communication anomalies when he was suddenly transferred to a desk job in Nebraska. Major Susan Kim had questioned intelligence distribution protocols before being forced into early medical retirement. Captain Robert Martinez had identified suspicious patterns in operational security before dying in what was officially ruled a training accident. Sarah realized with growing horror that she was likely the only survivor of a systematic purge designed to eliminate anyone who might expose the conspiracy. Her demotion hadn't been punishment, it had been a delayed execution, allowing the conspirators to monitor her activities and ensure she hadn't shared her discoveries with others before eliminating her permanently. The personal nature of the threat became even clearer when she discovered surveillance equipment in her own locker. Hidden cameras and audio recording devices had been monitoring her every move within the Pentagon, documenting her interactions and conversations. The conspirators weren't just planning to kill her, they were gathering evidence to justify her elimination as a security threat who'd finally cracked under pressure. But Sarah's most dangerous discovery came Friday evening when she intercepted communications that revealed the immediate timeline for their next operation. While emptying trash bins in Colonel Pierce's office, she discovered encrypted communication logs that detailed a coordinated attack planned for the following Monday. According to the intercepted messages, Chinese submarines were being positioned to ambush an American naval convoy that would be transiting through the South China Sea. The attack would be disguised as an accident or equipment failure, eliminating evidence of foreign involvement while dealing a devastating blow to American naval capabilities in the region. The convoy included the USS Columbia, a nuclear submarine carrying 154 crew members, and the USS Independence, a combat ship with 419 personnel aboard. Nearly 600 American sailors were sailing into a carefully orchestrated death trap, and they had no idea that their own intelligence officers were feeding their positions to the enemy. Sarah photographed the communication logs, her hands trembling with the magnitude of what she'd uncovered. This wasn't just espionage anymore. It was an act of war being facilitated by American traitors who were willing to sacrifice their own countrymen for money and ideology. The implications extended far beyond the immediate threat to the naval convoy. If the attack succeeded, it would be portrayed as Chinese defensive action against American aggression in disputed waters. The incident would provide justification for expanded Chinese military operations throughout the Pacific, potentially triggering a regional conflict that could escalate into global warfare. As Sarah prepared to leave the Pentagon that evening, she realized that her investigation had uncovered something far more sinister than simple espionage. This was a coordinated effort to manipulate American military operations into a strategic disaster that would shift the balance of power throughout the Pacific region. The conspirators weren't just selling intelligence, they were orchestrating a military catastrophe designed to benefit Chinese strategic interests. But Sarah also realized that she was now the only person in position to prevent the disaster. The conspiracy had systematically eliminated or compromised everyone else who might have been able to expose their activities. The evidence she'd gathered was comprehensive enough to prove their guilt, but only if she could survive long enough to deliver it to trustworthy authorities. The weekend that Webb had referenced as her deadline was no longer just about her personal survival. It was about preventing an act of war that would cost hundreds of American lives and potentially trigger a Pacific conflict. The network had expanded beyond her worst fears, but her mission had become correspondingly critical. Sarah Mitchell had 48 hours to transform from victim to hero, from the hunted to the hunter. The intelligence officer they'd tried to humiliate and eliminate was about to remind them that training and determination could overcome even the most sophisticated conspiracy. The real battle was about to begin, and failure wasn't just about her own life anymore. It was about preventing a disaster that could change the course of history. Saturday morning found Stella Mitchell in the most dangerous position of her career, possessing information that could prevent an international catastrophe while being hunted by traitors who controlled the very institutions meant to protect national security. With less than 36 hours before the planned attack on American naval forces, she needed all eyes, but determining who could be trusted had become a matter of life and death. Her first potential ally revealed himself in an unexpected way. While conducting what appeared to be routine weekend maintenance in the Pentagon's lower levels, Stella encountered Master Sergeant James Rodriguez working alone in the secure communications facility. Rodriguez was Frank's younger brother, a career military communications specialist with 22 years of service and a reputation for absolute integrity. What made Rodriguez significant wasn't his technical expertise or his family connection, it was what Sarah observed him doing. Instead of standard weekend maintenance, Rodriguez was conducting unauthorized analysis of communication logs, cross-referencing transmission patterns with personnel access records. His investigation showed the same methodical approach that had characterized Sarah's own intelligence work. Their conversation began carefully, with each testing the other's loyalty and intentions. Rodriguez spoke first, his weathered face grave with concern. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Have you noticed anything unusual about intelligence communications in the past few weeks?" Sarah studied him carefully, evaluating whether this was genuine concern or an elaborate trap. Rodriguez's service record was exemplary, but the conspiracy had already demonstrated its ability to compromise personnel at every level. "Why are you asking, Sergeant?" "Because I've been tracking communication anomalies that suggest unauthorized access to classified systems," Rodriguez replied. "Someone's been copying and transmitting intelligence reports through channels that bypass normal security protocols. The pattern suggests systematic espionage at the highest levels." It was the confirmation Sarah had been hoping for, evidence that someone else had noticed the conspiracy's activities independently. But she needed to be certain of Rodriguez's motivations before revealing what she'd discovered. "What made you start investigating?" Rodriguez's expression darkened. 3 weeks ago, I received orders to modify encryption protocols for Pacific Fleet communications. The changes created backdoors that would allow unauthorized monitoring of naval operations. When I questioned the orders, I was told they came from General Collins herself. General Collins, the same officer Sarah had seen meeting with Webb, and foreign contacts in the parking garage. Rodriguez's technical expertise had revealed the same conspiracy from a different angle, providing corroboration for her own discoveries. "Sergeant," Sarah said carefully, "what would you say if I told you that General Collins isn't working alone? That this conspiracy involves multiple high-ranking officers and poses an immediate threat to American naval operations?" Rodriguez's eyes sharpened with the intensity of a career soldier who'd recognized an enemy threat. "I'd say that we need to stop them before people start dying." "Ma'am, are you telling me you have evidence of this conspiracy?" Sarah made the decision that would determine both their fates. Over the next hour, she shared her discoveries with Rodriguez, showing him the photographs and documents she'd collected over 3 weeks of covert investigation. Rodriguez's technical knowledge provided crucial context for the intelligence she'd gathered, confirming her worst fears about the scope and sophistication of the operation. This is worse than systematic espionage, Rodriguez concluded after reviewing her evidence. This is a coordinated effort to manipulate American military operations into a strategic disaster. The communication modifications I was ordered to implement would give Chinese intelligence real-time access to every naval operation in the Pacific. But their alliance was complicated by the arrival of an unexpected third party. Captain Chun appeared in the communications facility, his young face tight with urgency and fear. His presence immediately raised questions about security and operational compartmentalization. "Sarah," Chun said breathlessly, "I've been looking for you everywhere. Major Walsh has been asking questions about your whereabouts, and there are rumors that security is planning to arrest you tomorrow morning." Rodriguez looked between Sarah and Chun with the suspicion of a veteran who'd learned not to trust coincidences. "Captain, how did you know to look for her here?" Chun's explanation revealed both promising intelligence and alarming security breaches. "I've been monitoring communication patterns like Sarah suggested, and I discovered that several high-ranking officers have been conducting unauthorized meetings this weekend. The pattern suggests they're preparing for some kind of major operation." "What kind of operation?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Intelligence indicates they're planning to eliminate security threats before implementing what they're calling Phase 3 of some larger operation. Your name appeared on multiple communication logs as a priority target." The timeline was accelerating, even faster than Sarah had feared. The conspirators weren't waiting until Monday to eliminate her. They were moving to clean house immediately, probably to ensure operational security before the planned naval attack. Rodriguez's technical analysis provided disturbing confirmation of Chun's intelligence. "I've been monitoring secure channels throughout the weekend, and there's definitely increased activity among the personnel you've identified as conspirators. They're coordinating something big, and they want all loose ends tied up before implementation." But their planning session was interrupted by an alarm that sent chills through all three conspirators. The secure facility's motion sensors had detected unauthorized access in the adjacent server room, the same location where Sarah had discovered the communication hub being used to transmit intelligence to foreign contacts. Rodriguez moved to his monitoring station with practiced efficiency, pulling up security feeds that showed two figures moving through the server room with obvious familiarity. Sarah recognized them immediately: Technical Specialist Santos and Colonel Pierce, working together to access the same unauthorized communication terminal that had been broadcasting submarine positions to Chinese intelligence. "They're transmitting final coordinates for tomorrow's operation," Rodriguez whispered, his voice tight with anger. "Real-time positioning data for the naval convoy that's scheduled to transit the South China Sea." Sarah felt the weight of 600 American lives pressing down on her conscience. The attack wasn't just planned for Monday, it was being coordinated in real time, with American traitors providing continuous updates to ensure the ambush would be completely successful. Chun's voice carried desperate urgency. "We have to stop them. If that convoy sails into Chinese territorial waters without knowing they're being tracked, it'll be a massacre." But their intervention was complicated by the appearance of additional security personnel throughout the facility. Rodriguez's monitors showed armed guards taking positions at critical access points, suggesting that the conspirators had implemented lockdown procedures to prevent interference with their final operational phase. "We're trapped," Rodriguez observed grimly. "They've secured the building to prevent anyone from interrupting their transmission or escaping to warn higher authorities." Sarah studied the security feeds, her mind racing through tactical options developed over 15 years of intelligence operations. The conspirators had made a critical error in their operational security. They'd assumed that their targets would react with panic rather than professional competence. "No," she said quietly, "they've trapped themselves. They're so focused on preventing us from escaping that they've created a closed environment where we can observe and document everything they're doing. Over the next several hours, Sarah, Rodriguez, and Chun conducted a coordinated intelligence operation that documented the conspiracy's final phase with devastating thoroughness. Rodriguez used his technical access to record the unauthorized transmissions, capturing evidence of real-time intelligence sharing with foreign contacts. Chun monitored personnel movements and communications, creating a comprehensive picture of the conspiracy's command structure. Sarah coordinated their efforts while photographing additional evidence that would prove the scope of the betrayal. Their work revealed the full horror of what was planned for Monday. The attack on the American naval convoy wasn't just intended to eliminate specific military assets. It was designed to create an international incident that would justify expanded Chinese military operations throughout the Pacific. The conspiracy wasn't just about espionage. It was about manipulating American military operations to trigger a regional conflict that would benefit Chinese strategic interests. But their documentation efforts also revealed a crucial vulnerability in the conspirators' plan. The real-time transmission of naval positions required continuous communication between the Pentagon facility and Chinese intelligence services. If that communication could be disrupted at the critical moment, the attack would fail due to lack of current targeting information. Rodriguez's technical expertise provided the solution. I can introduce a virus into their unauthorized communication system that will corrupt their transmissions without affecting legitimate Pentagon operations. But I'll need access to the main server room, and that means getting past the security lockdown they've implemented. Sarah's operational experience suggested a different approach. We don't need to physically access their systems. We need to create evidence so compelling that legitimate authorities will be forced to act, even if some of those authorities are compromised. The plan they developed over the remaining hours of Saturday night was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of trying to stop the conspiracy directly, they would document it so thoroughly that its exposure would be inevitable. Rodriguez would prepare technical evidence that proved unauthorized intelligence transmission. Chun would compile personnel records that demonstrated the pattern of eliminating investigating officers. Sarah would coordinate their findings into a comprehensive intelligence package that could be transmitted simultaneously to multiple authorities, making suppression impossible. As Sunday morning approached, Sarah realized that their investigation had revealed something even more valuable than evidence of the conspiracy: proof that integrity and competence still existed within the American military system. Rodriguez and Chun represented the thousands of dedicated professionals who would never betray their country for money or ideology. The conspiracy had made a fatal error in assuming that eliminating a few investigating officers would eliminate all threats to their operation. Instead, they'd created a network of loyal Americans who were now positioned to expose their treachery and prevent the disaster they'd planned. With less than 24 hours remaining before the planned attack, Sarah Mitchell was no longer fighting alone. The intelligence officer they'd tried to humiliate and eliminate had found allies who shared her commitment to protecting American lives and preserving national security. The final phase of the operation was about to begin, and the conspirators were about to discover that their systematic betrayal had awakened something far more dangerous than a single disgraced colonel: the righteous anger of patriots who would never surrender their country to foreign enemies. Sunday afternoon transformed the Pentagon into a battlefield where loyalty and treachery would clash in the shadows, with the lives of 600 American sailors hanging in the balance. Stella Mitchell's 3-week journey from humiliated janitor to counterintelligence operative was about to reach its climax in a confrontation that would determine not just her survival, but the fate of American naval operations in the Pacific. First shots of the final battle were fired at 2:47 p.m. when Major Walsh appeared in the maintenance facility with 2 security personnel Stella didn't recognize. Their arrival wasn't coincidental. The conspirators had finally decided that Sarah's elimination could no longer be delayed until their preferred timeline. "Sarah Mitchell," Walsh announced with the authority of someone executing official orders. "You're required to accompany us for questioning regarding security violations and unauthorized access to classified materials." Sarah continued organizing cleaning supplies with the methodical precision that had characterized her cover identity for weeks. "I'm scheduled for building maintenance until 1800 hours. Major, perhaps we could arrange an appointment during regular business hours?" Walsh's patience evaporated immediately. "This isn't a request, Mitchell. You're coming with us now, or you'll be carried out. Your choice." But Sarah had prepared for this moment. Hidden throughout the maintenance facility were copies of the evidence she'd gathered, packaged for immediate transmission to multiple authorities if she failed to check in at predetermined intervals. Rodriguez and Chun were positioned to execute their own phases of the operation, regardless of what happened to her personally. Asterisk, of course. "Major," Sarah replied, setting down her supplies and turning to face Walsh directly. "I'm always happy to cooperate with official investigations. But I should mention that I've been conducting my own investigation into security violations. Perhaps we can compare notes." The change in Sarah's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Gone was the defeated janitor who'd endured weeks of systematic humiliation. In her place stood the intelligence officer who'd survived operations in hostile territory that would have broken lesser operators. Walsh's security personnel shifted nervously, suddenly uncertain about the nature of their assignment. "What kind of investigation?" Walsh demanded, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. Sarah smiled, and the expression carried 15 years of professional competence and barely contained anger. "The kind that documents systematic espionage, identifies foreign intelligence assets, and prevents acts of war disguised as training accidents." The words hit Walsh like physical blows. Her confident expression crumbled as she realized that her prey had become the predator, that the woman they'd tried to destroy had been hunting them instead. One of the security personnel actually took a step backward, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. "You're delusional," Walsh said, but her voice lacked conviction. 3 weeks of mopping floors has obviously affected your mental stability. "Has it?" Sarah asked conversationally. "Then perhaps you can explain why Colonel Webb has been meeting with Chinese intelligence operatives in the Pentagon parking garage, or why General Collins has been providing NATO encryption keys to foreign contacts, or why technical specialist Santos has been transmitting real-time submarine positions to Beijing through unauthorized communication channels." Each revelation struck Walsh like a hammer blow. Sarah's detailed knowledge of the conspiracy's operations made it clear that she wasn't guessing or fishing for information. She had evidence, documentation, proof of their treachery. "I think," Sarah continued, "that it's time for you to accompany me for questioning, Major, along with your associates here, who I suspect aren't actually Pentagon security personnel." The confrontation reached its breaking point when one of Walsh's companions reached for his weapon. But Sarah had anticipated this moment, had prepared for it with the tactical awareness that had kept her alive in situations far more dangerous than a Pentagon corridor. Her response was swift and professional. The first attacker found himself on the floor with a dislocated shoulder before he could clear his holster. The second discovered that Sarah's years of combat training hadn't been dulled by 3 weeks of janitorial work. Walsh herself was face down on the floor with her hands secured behind her back before she could call for backup that would never arrive. "The problem with recruiting foreign operatives for domestic operations," Sarah explained to the subdued Walsh, "is that they don't understand American military training standards. Your friends here might be adequate for intimidation work, but they're not prepared for actual combat with a trained operator." But the confrontation in the maintenance facility was only the opening engagement of a larger battle. Throughout the Pentagon, Rodriguez and Chun were implementing their own phases of the operation, using the evidence Sarah had gathered to trigger systematic exposure of the conspiracy. Rodriguez's technical assault on the unauthorized communication system was surgical in its precision. Instead of simply disrupting the transmissions, he introduced tracking software that would identify every recipient of stolen intelligence while preserving evidence of the conspiracy's activities. The virus he'd designed would corrupt future transmissions while maintaining records of past ones, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence. Simultaneously, Chun was implementing the intelligence distribution phase of their operation. Copies of their documented evidence were being transmitted to FBI counterintelligence, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, Defense Intelligence Agency headquarters, and congressional oversight committees. The conspiracy had positioned assets throughout the Pentagon's hierarchy, but they couldn't control every legitimate authority in the American security apparatus. The responses came swiftly and decisively. Within an hour of Chun's transmissions, legitimate federal agents were moving through the Pentagon with arrest warrants based on the evidence Sarah's team had provided. The conspiracy's greatest strength, their positions within the command structure, became their fatal weakness once their activities were exposed to outside authorities. Colonel Webb was arrested in his office while attempting to destroy evidence of his communications with foreign contacts. General Collins was taken into custody at her residence, where federal agents discovered additional documentation of her treacherous activities. Admiral Bradley was apprehended at Reagan National Airport, apparently attempting to flee the country with classified materials and substantial financial assets, but the conspiracy's most dangerous phase was still operational. Despite the arrests of key personnel, the unauthorized communication system was still transmitting real-time intelligence about the naval convoy's position. Chinese submarines were already moving into attack positions, and the American fleet was sailing unknowingly toward a carefully orchestrated ambush. Sarah's final confrontation came with Colonel Pierce, who had managed to avoid the initial wave of arrests and was making a desperate attempt to complete the transmission of targeting data for Monday's attack. Pierce had barricaded herself in the secure server room, using her administrative access to lock out legitimate personnel while she fed final coordinates to Chinese intelligence. The standoff required Sarah to draw upon every skill she'd developed over 15 years of intelligence operations. Pierce was armed, desperate, and positioned in a facility designed to prevent unauthorized access. But Sarah had spent 3 weeks learning every corridor, every access point, every vulnerability in the Pentagon's lower levels. That her approach was methodical and professional, using maintenance tunnels and service corridors that Pierce didn't know existed. Sarah positioned herself to observe the traitor's activities without being detected. Pierce was indeed transmitting final targeting data, providing Chinese submarines with precise coordinates for intercepting the American convoy. But Pierce had made a critical error in her desperation. The communication system she was using for her treacherous transmissions was the same one that Rodriguez had compromised with his tracking virus. Every piece of intelligence she transmitted was being recorded and traced, creating evidence that would expose not just her own activities, but the entire Chinese intelligence operation she was supporting. Sarah's final action was elegantly simple. Instead of attempting a dramatic physical confrontation, she used Pierce's own communication system against her. A single command transmitted through Rodriguez's compromised network sent a shutdown signal that terminated all unauthorized transmissions while preserving complete records of Pierce's activities. Pierce's desperate attempts to restore communication were futile. The Chinese submarines waiting to ambush the American convoy suddenly found themselves operating without current intelligence, forced to attack targets whose positions they couldn't accurately determine. The carefully orchestrated ambush became a confused engagement that American Naval forces could survive and counter. As federal agents finally breached the server room and arrested Pierce, Sarah realized that her 3-week journey from victim to hero was complete. The conspiracy that had tried to humiliate and eliminate her had been systematically exposed and defeated. More importantly, 600 American sailors would return home safely because a disgraced janitor had refused to accept defeat. The final confrontation had lasted less than 6 hours, but its consequences would reshape American intelligence operations for years to come. The systematic betrayal that had threatened to trigger a Pacific War had been prevented by the very people the conspirators had tried to eliminate or marginalize. Sarah Mitchell stood in the Pentagon's lower levels, watching federal agents arrest the last of the traitors, and reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a broken intelligence officer hiding from her past. Today, she was the operative who'd prevented an international catastrophe and reminded everyone that honor and competence could overcome even the most sophisticated treachery. The battle was over, but the real victory belonged to every American service member who would never know how close they'd come to disaster, and how a janitor with a mop and bucket had saved their lives. The aftermath of the conspiracy's exposure transformed the Pentagon from a fortress of secrets into a transparent showcase of accountability. Within 48 hours of the arrests, a joint investigation team comprising FBI counterintelligence, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and Defense Intelligence Agency personnel had established a comprehensive timeline of the betrayal that shocked even seasoned investigators. The scope of the conspiracy exceeded everyone's worst fears. Over 18 months, the network had compromised 847 classified operations, sold intelligence on 23 allied military exercises, and provided foreign adversaries with detailed specifications for 15 different weapon systems. The financial trail revealed payments totaling $47 million distributed among conspirators, with additional assets hidden in offshore accounts controlled by Chinese intelligence services. Stella Mitchell found herself at the center of a media storm that transformed her from an invisible janitor into a reluctant national hero. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the intelligence officer who'd been systematically humiliated for mishandling classified information had actually prevented the greatest intelligence disaster in American military history. The first indication of her changed status came when Secretary of Defense Margaret Harrison personally visited the Pentagon to meet with the woman who'd single-handedly exposed the conspiracy. Harrison, a former Marine general with a reputation for direct communication, didn't waste time with diplomatic pleasantries. "Colonel Mitchell," Harrison said, using Stella's rank for the first time in 3 weeks, "I owe you an apology. This entire department owes you an apology. Your country owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Stella, still wearing her maintenance uniform, met Harrison's gaze steadily. "With respect, Madam Secretary, I was just doing my job. The same job I'd been doing for 15 years, protecting American lives and interests." Harrison smiled grimly. "The difference is that this time you were doing it while everyone around you was actively working against you. That takes a special kind of courage and dedication." The Secretary's next words carried weight that would reshape Sarah's entire future. "I'm here to offer you reinstatement to your full rank, command of the new counterintelligence operations division, and a promotion to brigadier general. We need people like you in positions where they can prevent this kind of disaster from happening again." The offer was everything Sarah could have hoped for 3 weeks earlier, when her career seemed destroyed and her reputation ruined. But the experience of operating in the shadows, of seeing how quickly institutions could be corrupted and how easily good people could be marginalized, had changed her perspective on traditional command structures. "I appreciate the offer, Madam Secretary," Sarah replied carefully, "but I think I might be more effective working outside conventional hierarchies." The conspiracy succeeded because they understood how to manipulate official channels. Sometimes the most important work happens in the spaces between official recognition. Harrison studied her with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading. Combat veterans who'd seen too much. "What are you suggesting, Colonel?" "I'm suggesting that we create a new kind of position, one that operates with complete independence from normal command structures, with direct reporting authority to yourself and selected congressional oversight. Someone who can investigate threats that traditional hierarchies might miss or suppress." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Harrison gradually recognizing that Sarah's 3 weeks as a janitor had provided insights into institutional vulnerabilities that no amount of traditional training could have delivered. By the end of their meeting, the secretary had authorized the creation of an unprecedented position: Independent Inspector General for Defense, Intelligence Integrity. But Sarah's personal vindication was secondary to the systematic accountability that followed the conspiracy's exposure. The investigations revealed a web of corruption and compromise that extended far beyond the Pentagon into defense contractors, allied intelligence services, and academic institutions that had been unwittingly facilitating foreign intelligence operations. Colonel Webb's prosecution became a landmark case in military justice. The evidence Sarah's team had gathered was so comprehensive that Webb's defense attorneys quickly abandoned any pretense of innocence, instead arguing for leniency based on his previous service record. The argument failed spectacularly when prosecutors revealed that Webb had been selling intelligence to Chinese contacts for over 5 years, compromising operations that had resulted in the deaths of Allied operatives and American service members. Webb's sentencing hearing provided a moment of profound satisfaction for Sarah, who testified as the primary witness against her former colleague. Facing the man who'd threatened her life and orchestrated her humiliation, Sarah delivered testimony that was clinical, professional, and devastating in its thoroughness. "Colonel Webb didn't just betray classified information," Sarah testified. "He betrayed every person who trusted him with their lives and their secrets. He compromised operations that cost lives, exposed assets who were subsequently eliminated by hostile forces, and planned an attack that would have killed 600 American sailors. His actions constitute the most comprehensive betrayal of military trust in our nation's history." Webb's sentence of life imprisonment, without parole, sent a clear message throughout the military and intelligence communities. Treason would be met with the full force of military justice, regardless of rank or previous service. Major Walsh's case proved equally satisfying in its resolution. Her prosecution revealed that she'd been recruited by Chinese intelligence while attending a prestigious military academy fellowship program 3 years earlier. The recruitment had been subtle and sophisticated, playing on her ambitions and resentments while gradually compromising her loyalty through financial incentives and ideological manipulation. Walsh's defense attempted to portray her as a victim of foreign manipulation, but the evidence of her enthusiastic participation in Sarah's systematic humiliation destroyed any sympathy she might have garnered. The recorded conversations in which she'd discussed Sarah's potential suicide and celebrated her professional destruction revealed a level of cruelty that shocked even experienced prosecutors. During Walsh's sentencing, Sarah chose to address the court directly, providing victim impact testimony that captured the personal cost of the conspiracy's psychological warfare. "Major Walsh didn't just participate in espionage," Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had characterized her most effective intelligence briefings. "She orchestrated a campaign of systematic dehumanization designed to break my spirit and eliminate me as a threat to their operation. She turned my workplace into a hostile environment where I was treated as less than human, where my professional expertise was dismissed, and where my basic dignity was stripped away day by day." Sarah paused, looking directly at Walsh, who couldn't meet her gaze. But her greatest failure wasn't moral or professional. It was tactical. By trying to make me invisible, she gave me the perfect position to observe everything she and her conspirators were doing. Her cruelty became the instrument of her own exposure. Walsh received a sentence of 45 years in federal prison, ensuring that she would spend the remainder of her useful life paying for her betrayal. The systematic accountability extended beyond individual prosecutions to institutional reforms that would prevent similar conspiracies in the future. Sarah found herself leading a comprehensive review of Pentagon security protocols, personnel vetting procedures, and counterintelligence operations. Her recommendations were radical and comprehensive. Traditional hierarchical reporting was supplemented with independent oversight mechanisms. Personnel in sensitive positions were subject to continuous monitoring rather than periodic reviews. Financial auditing became mandatory for all personnel with access to classified information. Most importantly, protection mechanisms were established for whistleblowers and those reporting suspicious activities. The changes weren't popular with everyone. Several senior officers complained that the new procedures created an atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia that would undermine unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. Sarah's response to these concerns was characteristically direct. Unit cohesion built on willful blindness to corruption isn't worth preserving, she told a gathering of Pentagon leadership. Operational effectiveness that depends on ignoring security breaches is a contradiction in terms. The conspiracy succeeded because good people remained silent when they noticed irregularities. We're creating systems that reward speaking up rather than keeping quiet. The most satisfying aspect of the institutional reforms was the recognition program established for personnel who demonstrated integrity under pressure. Master Sergeant Rodriguez received the Defense Intelligence Medal for his technical analysis that had helped expose the conspiracy. Captain Chun was promoted to Major and assigned to Sarah's new Independent Oversight Division. Even Frank Rodriguez, the maintenance supervisor who'd treated Sarah with dignity throughout her ordeal, received official recognition for maintaining professional standards regardless of bureaucratic pressure. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 6 months after the conspiracy's exposure, Sarah received a letter from Captain Maria Santos of the USS Columbia, the submarine that would have been the primary target of the planned Chinese ambush. Colonel Mitchell, Santos wrote, "You don't know me, but you saved my life and the lives of 153 other crew members aboard my submarine. We were sailing directly into the trap that your investigation prevented. Every morning when I wake up, every evening when I call my family, every moment I spend with my crew, I remember that I owe these experiences to a stranger who risked everything to protect people she'd never met. You represent everything that's best about military service, the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort and safety to protect others. Thank you for reminding us what honor actually looks like." The letter, signed by Santos and every member of her crew, became Sarah's most treasured possession, more valuable than her restored rank, her new position, or the various medals and commendations that followed her vindication. As Sarah reflected on her journey from disgraced janitor to national hero, she realized that the conspiracy's greatest gift hadn't been the opportunity for revenge or professional vindication. It had been the reminder that individual integrity could overcome institutional corruption, that one person's commitment to truth could protect hundreds of lives, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who appeared powerless but refused to surrender their principles. The justice that had been served wasn't just about punishing traitors. It was about proving that honor and competence would ultimately triumph over greed and betrayal. The woman who'd been systematically humiliated for 3 weeks had reminded an entire nation what it meant to serve with distinction, regardless of rank or recognition. Justice had been served, but more importantly, faith in American military. Integrity had been restored by someone who'd never stopped believing in the values she'd sworn to defend. 2 years after the conspiracy's exposure, Stella Mitchell stood in the same Pentagon corridor where she'd once pushed a janitor's cart. But everything had changed. The hallways that had once echoed with whispers about her disgrace now buzzed with conversations about the reforms she'd implemented. The offices where traitors had once plotted against American interests now housed the most advanced counterintelligence operation in the world. Her new position as Independent Inspector General for Defense Intelligence Integrity had evolved into something unprecedented in American military history. Operating with direct authority from the Secretary of Defense and congressional oversight, Stella commanded a team of investigators who worked outside traditional hierarchies to identify and eliminate threats that conventional structures might miss. The success of her approach was measurable in hard numbers. Over 24 months, her team had identified and prevented 17 separate attempts at foreign infiltration of American military systems. They'd exposed 12 defense contractors who were selling technology specifications to hostile nations. Most importantly, they'd created a culture where reporting suspicious activities was rewarded rather than punished. But Stella's greatest achievement wasn't measured in operations prevented or traitors caught. It was the transformation of institutional attitude toward integrity and accountability. The woman who'd been systematically humiliated for asking inconvenient questions had created an environment where questioning authority was not only accepted, but mandated. The change was evident during her weekly briefing to Secretary Harrison, where Sarah presented her latest assessment of defense intelligence security. The secretary, a former Marine general who'd initially been skeptical of Sarah's unconventional approach, had become one of her strongest supporters. "Your latest report on contractor security is impressive," Harrison said, reviewing Sarah's findings on potential vulnerabilities in the weapons development process. 3 separate attempts at technology theft prevented, 2 hostile intelligence networks exposed, and 1 defense contractor completely restructured to eliminate security risks. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained serious. "The threats are becoming more sophisticated, Madam Secretary. Foreign intelligence services have learned from Webb's failure. They're developing new approaches that are harder to detect and counter. Which is why we need people like you asking the difficult questions," Harrison replied. "People who aren't constrained by traditional thinking or institutional politics." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Master Sergeant Rodriguez entered with a tablet containing urgent intelligence that would test everything Sarah had built over the past 2 years. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his weathered face grim with concern, "we've detected anomalies in the new quantum communication system that suggest possible foreign interference. The patterns are subtle, but they're consistent with advanced espionage techniques." Sarah studied the data Rodriguez presented, her mind immediately recognizing the sophisticated approach that characterized state-sponsored intelligence operations. But unlike the Webb conspiracy, this threat was being conducted by operatives who understood the new security protocols she'd implemented. "They're learning," Sarah observed, "adapting to our countermeasures and developing new approaches that exploit gaps we haven't identified yet." Harrison's expression sharpened with the intensity of a combat veteran recognizing an emerging threat. "What's your assessment of the situation's severity?" "High," Sarah replied without hesitation. "This isn't amateur opportunism like we saw with some of the contractor cases. This is professional-grade intelligence work conducted by people who understand our systems and our countermeasures." The challenge represented both a validation of Sarah's work and a test of its effectiveness. The security improvements she'd implemented had successfully deterred conventional espionage attempts, but they'd also forced hostile intelligence services to develop more sophisticated approaches that tested the limits of even her enhanced systems. But Sarah's response to the new threat demonstrated how completely her perspective had evolved from conventional military thinking Instead of treating the quantum communication anomalies as a crisis requiring immediate action, she saw them as an opportunity to test and improve her counterintelligence methods. "We're not going to rush into reactive measures," she told her team during their emergency briefing. "Instead, we're going to use this threat as a learning opportunity. We'll monitor their activities, document their methods, and understand their capabilities before we move to counter them." Captain Chun, now Major Chun and Sarah's deputy director, understood the strategic thinking behind her approach. "You want to turn their intelligence operation against them, use their activities to improve our own security while gathering evidence for their eventual prosecution." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "The web conspiracy succeeded because they operated in isolation, without anyone watching or questioning their activities. This new threat is operating under observation from day one. Their every move is being documented and analyzed." The investigation that followed over the next 6 months demonstrated the evolution of both espionage techniques and counterintelligence methods. The quantum communication infiltration was indeed sophisticated, conducted by operatives who understood advanced technology and security protocols. But Sarah's team was equally sophisticated, using the infiltration attempt as a comprehensive case study in modern espionage. The breakthrough came when Rodriguez identified the ultimate target of the quantum communication breach. The hostile operatives weren't trying to steal current intelligence. They were attempting to plant false information that would compromise future American military operations. It was a deception operation designed to manipulate American strategic thinking rather than simply gathering secrets. "They're not just spying on us," Rodriguez explained during the briefing that would reshape American understanding of modern intelligence threats. "They're trying to control what we know and how we think. This is psychological warfare disguised as traditional espionage." Sarah's response to this revelation demonstrated the strategic thinking that had made her indispensable to American security. Instead of simply stopping the deception operation, she proposed using it to feed false information back to hostile intelligence services, while appearing to be unaware of their activities. "We'll turn their own deception against them," she explained to Secretary Harrison during the briefing that would authorize the most sophisticated counterintelligence operation in American history. "They think they're manipulating our decision-making. Instead, we'll manipulate theirs by controlling what information they receive through their own intelligence channels." The operation that followed became a textbook example of modern counterintelligence work. Over 12 months, Sarah's team fed carefully crafted false information through the compromised quantum communication system, leading hostile intelligence services to make strategic errors that exposed their operations throughout the Pacific region. The success was comprehensive and decisive. 17 foreign intelligence operatives were identified and either arrested or expelled from the country. 3 allied nations discovered and eliminated hostile intelligence networks that had been operating undetected for years. Most importantly, American strategic deception led to foreign military positioning that actually enhanced American security rather than threatening it. But Sarah's greatest achievement during this period wasn't operational success. It was the development of a new generation of intelligence professionals who understood that questioning authority and challenging assumptions weren't threats to security, but essential components of it. Major Chun had evolved into a master of technical counterintelligence who could identify hostile activities that would have been invisible to previous generations of analysts. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had become a legend in communication security, training personnel throughout the Defense Department in advanced threat detection. Even Frank Rodriguez, the maintenance supervisor who'd shown Sarah basic human dignity during her darkest period, had been promoted to Facility Security Director. The transformation extended beyond individual careers to institutional culture. The Pentagon that had once punished Sarah for asking inconvenient questions now mandated that all personnel report suspicious activities, regardless of the rank or position of those involved. The military hierarchy that had once protected traitors, through institutional loyalty, now rewarded those who prioritized national security over personal relationships. Sarah's final achievement was ensuring that her work would continue beyond her own career. The independent inspector general position she'd created was institutionalized with congressional authorization and permanent funding. The investigative methods she'd developed were codified into training programs used throughout the intelligence community. Most importantly, the culture of accountability she'd fostered became embedded in military leadership development. During her final briefing as Independent Inspector General, before accepting a position as Director of the new National Counterintelligence Academy, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from disgraced janitor to guardian of American intelligence integrity. 3 years ago, she told the assembled defense leadership, I was pushing a mop through these same corridors, ignored and dismissed by everyone around me. That experience taught me something invaluable. The most dangerous threats often come from the people we trust most, and the most important insights often come from the people we ignore completely. She paused, looking around the room filled with officers who now hung on her every word, some of the same people who'd once crossed hallways to avoid her. The conspiracy that tried to destroy me succeeded in one crucial way. It reminded me that individual integrity matters more than institutional position. That asking difficult questions is more important than maintaining comfortable relationships. That protecting American lives and interests requires constant vigilance against threats both foreign and domestic. Sarah's final words as Independent Inspector General became the motto of the counterintelligence program she'd created. Trust, but verify. Question everything. Protect everyone. As she walked through the Pentagon corridors for the last time in her current role, Sarah encountered a young lieutenant who was obviously nervous about approaching such a legendary figure. The lieutenant, wearing a maintenance supervisor's badge, approached hesitantly. "Ma'am," the lieutenant said, "I just wanted to thank you. Your story, what you accomplished when everyone had written you off, it inspired me to volunteer for facility security duty. I figured if someone could save the country while pushing a mop, maybe there's important work to be done at every level." Sarah smiled, recognizing in the young officer the same commitment to service that had carried her through the darkest period of her career. "Lieutenant, the most important lesson I learned during my time in maintenance is that every job in the military matters. Every person has the potential to make a difference. Never let anyone convince you that your position determines your value." As Sarah left the Pentagon that evening, she reflected on the legacy she was leaving behind. The woman who'd been systematically humiliated and nearly eliminated had transformed American counterintelligence operations and created safeguards that would protect future generations of service members. But more importantly, she'd proven that individual integrity could overcome institutional corruption, that one person's commitment to truth could change an entire system, and that sometimes the most important victories were won by people who refused to accept defeat. Even when everyone around them had given up, the janitor who'd been invisible had become the guardian who watched over everyone. The officer who'd been silenced had found her voice and used it to protect her country. The woman who'd been written off as powerless had proved that true power comes from the courage to stand up for what's right, regardless of the personal cost. Sarah Mitchell's story had become legend, but more importantly, it had become a blueprint for anyone who wanted to make a difference in a world where the most dangerous enemies often wore friendly faces, and the most important battles were fought in the shadows by people who chose service over safety, truth over comfort, and integrity over everything else. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.